Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Jaykcob Martinez and I am a communication arts student with a minor in Spanish at the University of the Incarnate Word, and I am a senior graduating this May, and I hope to become a TV host right after graduation. Today, I will be continuing the discussion on Phillis Wheatley for the UIW Black History Month Research Showcase. So, I have to be honest. When I heard that Phillis was a poet and that I would have to be reading poetry or talking about poetry, I immediately rolled my eyes. Let's be honest, poetry is not for everybody. For me, it is difficult to understand and I can't really comprehend what is being written. It isn't something that I originally gravitate towards, and indeed, it is a challenge for me. My only connection with poetry is Maya Angelou. And the only reason I knew about her was because Oprah Winfrey introduced Maya on her show when I was a little boy. Needless to say, my knowledge and depth about poetry is limited. So when I hear that Phillis was revolutionary because of her poetry, I had doubts. I found that hard to believe. But thanks to Dr. D'Amico, I started to research Phillis for this assignment. I read the book from Jeffers and did some Google researches, and I have to say that I am indeed inspired by Phillis' ability to accomplish what she did, given that what she was up against in a time where being Black and a woman did not work in your favor. So today, my purpose is to demonstrate and support how the work of Phillis Wheatley during her life, and especially during the American Revolution, continues to transcend centuries later to today. I would argue that the way in which those who inspire us can make a profound impact in our futures. That inspiration can leave a lifetime and set in motion a ripple effect across generations, racial profiles, and even intellectual capabilities. So, what did Phillis do that was transformational and revolutionary? Well, as we know, Phillis Wheatley, her journey began in a ship while being transported as a kidnapped slave from West Africa. She ended up in Boston and was sold as a slave in a slave auction to the Wheatley family. Phillis was weak and not able to do hard labor as more slaves were expected to do. And at the same time, the Wheatleys began to recognize that Phillis had a profound intellect and they began to nurture it. Phillis took advantage of this opportunity, and after 4 years of being in Boston, she mastered English and was reading the classics in Greek and Latin, which I think is extremely unbelievable. Like most of us, she was inspired by someone or something. For her, British poet Alexander Pope was the person. Because of her inspiration, she began writing her poems like Being Brought from Africa to America, a poem she wrote on her personal experience of being a slave and her religious belief that set her free. You do see it there on the screen, but I do have to say that more of these poems were written by her. And in 1773, a volume of poems was published. She was 20 years old and the third American woman to publish a book. But what was so revolutionary was her bravery to communicate with General George Washington 1 year before the American Revolution. Yes, the first president of the United States. This was before he became president, and while he was leading his army against the British. When I found this out, I thought, who does Phillis think she is to be able to write to George Washington? A white man? Seriously? Well, she did it. She was not fighting on the front lines of the war, and by that time, she was a free woman. So why get involved? Well, her letter to him was instrumental in the revolution because she was able to influence his decision to include slaves in his army. This is a snip of what she wrote, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. Proceed, great chief, with virtue on that side, that every action let the goddess guide, a crown, a mansion, and a throne, that shine with golden fitting. Washington, be thine. So you may ask yourself, why would she do this? Why, really? Why would she do this? Why was she advocating or defending? Well, Phyllis wanted to bring some changes, especially for her own people. People of color were looked down upon and were not truly considered humans. It wasn't until whites understood that blacks have something to offer besides labor that the change would actually happen. This was her way of ending slavery, advocating for equality and freedom. The legacy of slavery is certainly something that white Americans are uneasy with. Blacks were supposedly less humans than whites, and being told that over and over again will make anyone feel that you are not worth anything and that you are not human. To me personally, it would totally crush the human spirit. So I can only imagine what they were going through and how they felt. As a result of her letter to George Washington, he was able to see her intellect and was extremely overwhelmed. He realized that black people were human beings and made changes to the Revolutionary War. She inspired him, a black woman, a slave that became free, inspired George Washington through her poems. So, what proof do we have that her work and influence is still present today? Well, I don't know how many of you guys watched the inauguration. I'm sure that many of you guys did. But do you remember that young black girl that recited her poem to the president and vice president of the United States of America and the entire country? Well, she did this in a poem. You know, the stuff I talked about at the beginning of this presentation that people don't really care about. Well, she did it. And I understood it. I understood exactly what Amanda Gorman was trying to say. She was basically writing to the president her thoughts about what needs to happen to overcome racism and social injustice and inspired equality in this country. And to me, it was very powerful. So after almost 250 years, we're still talking about poetry. We're still talking about a black woman, a president, and inspiration. The only sad part is that we're still trying to change the way and the minds that people think in this country and make them see that black people are human beings just like everyone else. But what about that ripple effect I mentioned early on at the beginning of this presentation? Well, guess who inspired Amanda Gorman? Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou's inspiration? Well, you guessed it. Phillis Wheatley. So we come full circle indeed. But what I also find monumental is that the influence that Phyllis had, not just in the American Revolution, but even today. We see that work on Jeffers, who writes this book, that is practically a love letter to her role model. The book highlights Jeffers, who grew up as a young black girl with a passion for writing because of Phillis Wheatley. You might ask yourself, what is the connection? Well, when someone does something so great, so phenomenal, people can become ingrained with hope. When those actions are selfless, then it can easily come across with love. Yes, I said love. When I would see Maya Angelou reciting her work, it was filled with love. When I saw Amanda Gorman reciting her poem, it was with love. Phyllis had poems filled with love. Jeffers practically love, a love story. She wrote a love story to her idol, to her role model. And if you get the book and if you read it, it was also filled with love. So we continue to see how influential poems can be, even if you can't really immediately understand them the way that I cannot understand them right away. You can see how powerful poems can be when they're filled with love. You can see how revolutionary poems can be when they can make us think something new, something different, change our ways, and see the spirit in all human beings. Phillis Wheatley started this. Her legacy continues even after almost 250 years. My name is Jaykcob Martinez, and happy Black History Month. Thank you, y'all.
feel a little strange taking the mic from Jaykcob, but I do want to thank you all for listening to this first part of presentations. And if Jaykcob has not convinced you to go and read more Phillis Wheatley Peters and Honoré Fannin Jeffers, I am not sure what will.